up. Drop what's in your hand.
It's just my screwdriver. I worked here 37 years.
Drop it. Now, don't move.
I'm not threatening anyone. I just want my tools.
Ceasefire!
If you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button now to never miss a story like this. The grainy footage from the workshop's security camera captured it all back in the sweltering summer of 2021 in Birmingham, Alabama. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 60s, with salt and pepper hair cropped short and a worn flannel shirt tucked into faded jeans, stepped through the side door of the old auto repair shop. His name was Leroy Junebug Thompson, a retired mechanic who'd spent nearly 4 decades under those grease-stained rafters. He moved with the deliberate gait of someone who'd carried heavy loads his whole life, his dark skin glistening with sweat under the harsh fluorescent lights. In his hand, he clutched a simple toolbox, but what caught the eye was the screwdriver he held loosely, like an extension of his arm after years of turning wrenches. The new owner, a young white man in his late 20s named Tyler Hargrove, with slicked-back blonde hair and a crisp polo shirt emblazoned with the company's logo, was already on edge. He'd taken over the shop just months earlier after a corporate buyout that left many longtime employees like Leary out in the cold. Tyler paced behind the counter, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice rising in pitch as he spoke to the dispatcher. "Yeah, there's a guy here threatening me with a weapon. He's acting aggressive, won't leave. Send someone quick." The camera picked up Leroy's calm demeanor. He wasn't shouting, wasn't lunging. He just wanted his tools back, the ones he'd bought with his own money over the years, left behind in the rush of layoffs. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as 2 patrol cars screeched into the parking lot. Officers burst through the door, guns drawn, their faces tense under the brim of their caps. The lead officer, a white man in his 40s named Sergeant Ryan Caldwell, with a stocky build and a mustache that hid a perpetual scowl, barked orders. "Hands up, drop whatever's in your hand." Leroy froze, his eyes widening in confusion. The screwdriver, it was just a tool, not a threat. But in that split second, the air thickened with misunderstanding. Caldwell's finger hovered on the trigger, his heart pounding from years of high-stakes calls. What unfolded next would shatter lives and expose cracks in a system that too often failed men like Leary. The camera rolled as shouts echoed off the metal walls, the clang of tools dropping, the sharp crack of gunfire. 3 shots rang out, each one a thunderclap in the confined space. Leroy staggered, blood blooming on his shoulder and thigh, the pain searing like hot iron. He dropped to his knees slowly, his voice hoarse but steady. "I've been turning nuts here for 37 years. His words trailed off into a groan, the workshop floor cold against his palms. The officers rushed forward, cuffs clicking, but Leroy's mind raced back to how it all started, a lifetime of hard work unraveling in an instant. As the screen flickered with the chaos of paramedics arriving, one question hung in the air. How did a simple request for personal belongings turn into this nightmare? And what hidden tensions had been brewing long before that fateful day? What do you think? Should Leary have just walked away? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The workshop still smelled of motor oil and old rubber, even as the paramedics loaded Leroy Thompson onto the stretcher. His flannel shirt was soaked dark red at the shoulder and thigh, the fabric sticking to skin that had once been tough as leather from decades under hoods. Birmingham's August heat pressed down like a heavy hand, making the concrete outside shimmer, but inside the shop the air felt colder than death itself. Sergeant Ryan Caldwell stood back, breathing hard, his Glock still warm in his holster. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist, eyes darting between the blood on the floor and the security camera blinking red in the corner. Leroy's voice, weak now, cut through the radio chatter. 37 years, I just wanted my snap-on set. He didn't finish. The oxygen mask went over his face and the doors of the ambulance slammed shut. Neighbors had started gathering across the street, old men in lawn chairs, women holding phones, kids on bikes, all watching the blue and red lights paint their faces. No one spoke loud enough for the officers to hear, but the look said enough. Back at the precinct later that evening, Caldwell sat in the break room with a lukewarm coffee, staring at the incident report he hadn't started yet. His hands shook just enough that he had to set the cup down. This wasn't his first shooting. In 2018, he'd fired twice at a fleeing suspect during a foot chase in Sly, missed both times, got a commendation anyway. In 2019, he'd tased a man high on meth who'd swung a tire iron. The department called it textbook restraint. But this one felt different. The man on the floor hadn't swung anything, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't even stepped forward. His partner that day, Officer Marcus Mac Donnelly, a younger white officer with a fresh academy haircut, leaned against the vending machine. "You good, Sarge?" Caldwell didn't look up. He had a screwdriver pointed at Hargrove. "I saw it." Mac nodded slowly, the way people do when they want to believe something but can't quite sell it to themselves. "Yeah," threatening posture. Owner was scared for his life. "We'll be fine." Across town, in a small brick house on 6th Avenue North, Leroy's daughter Tamika sat on the edge of her mother's couch, holding her phone so tight the case creaked. Her mother, Miss Evelyn Thompson, 64 and diabetic, rocked back and forth whispering the same prayer she'd said every night since Leroy came home from Vietnam in '72. Tamika kept refreshing the family group chat, waiting for news from UAB Hospital. The last text from the surgeon's nurse had come 40 minutes earlier, still in surgery. Critical but stable, Tamika's husband, a quiet man named Darius who drove a forklift at the port, paced the living room. They shot him over tools he paid for. Miss Evelyn lifted her head. He told me last week he was going down there one more time, said he couldn't sleep thinking about his box wrenches sitting in somebody else's drawer. Her voice cracked. My Junibug never raised his hand to nobody. Not once. What the family didn't know yet, what no one outside the department knew, was that Sergeant Caldwell had been the subject of 4 internal affairs complaints in the past 6 years. 2 were dismissed. One resulted in a 2-week suspension without pay after he was caught on dashcam using a racial slur during a traffic stop in 2017. The 4th, filed by a black teenager he detained too roughly outside a convenience store in 2020, was still under review when the shots rang out in the auto shop. The next morning, the Birmingham News ran a small article buried on page 6, "Man wounded in officer-involved shooting at auto repair business." It quoted the police department's prepared statement. Officers responded to a report of an armed individual making threats. The suspect failed to comply with verbal commands. Force was used in defense of the business owner and officers. No names were released. No bodycam footage mentioned. No mention of the screwdriver versus the 3 hollow point rounds that tore through Leroy's body. But inside the Thompson house, the phone finally rang. Tamika answered on the first vibration. "Ma'am, this is Dr. Patel from trauma. Your father made it through surgery. He's in ICU now. We got the bleeder in the femoral artery under control, but he's not out of the woods." Tamika pressed the phone to her chest and let the tears come. Relief and rage arrived at the same time, fighting for space in her throat. Across the city, Tyler Hargrove sat in his air-conditioned office above the shop, staring at the same security footage the police had already copied. He kept replaying the moment Leroy walked in. The older man hadn't even looked angry, just tired, determined. Hargrove rubbed his temples. He told the 911 operator weapon because the screwdriver looked dangerous in the moment. Or maybe because he was 28, new to ownership, and scared of losing control of the place he'd just bought. Now the word weapon sat like lead in his stomach. And somewhere in a locked evidence room, the screwdriver lay in a plastic bag next to a tag that read, "Item number 21-874, suspected deadly weapon." How does a man lose everything he built in 37 years over a single tool he owned? Tell me in the comments, have you ever had something taken from you that the system refused to give back? Drop your story below. I'm reading every one. Leroy Thompson lay in the sterile white of the ICU bed at UAB Hospital, tubes snaking from his arms like vines reclaiming an old fence. The beeps of the monitor echoed in his head, steady but mocking, each one pulling him back to memories he'd tried to bury under layers of grease and grit. It was 3 days after the shooting, and the morphine dulled the fire in his shoulder and thigh, but it couldn't touch the deeper ache, the one that had driven him to that auto shop in the first place. Why risk it? Why not just buy new tools with his meager pension? The answer lay in the faded scars on his knuckles, the ones from turning wrenches since he was 16, and the invisible ones from a life spent proving his worth in a world that kept moving the goalposts. Flashback to 1972, when Leroy stepped off the plane at Birmingham Shuttlesworth International, his army greens still stiff from the flight out of Saigon. He was 23 then, a kid from the West Side projects who'd enlisted to escape the streets, only to find hell in the jungles. The humidity hit him like a slap, but it was the stares that burned hottest, white folks at the baggage claim whispering about those boys coming back changed. His purple heart for a shrapnel wound in his calf didn't mean much when the VA shuffled his paperwork for months. No heroes welcome, just a bus ride home to a mother who cried and a father who said, "Get a job, son, war's over." He found work at Hargrove Auto Repair, not the new corporate version, but the original, run by Old Man Hargrove, a gruff Korean war vet who didn't care about color as long as you fixed cars right. Leroy started sweeping floors, but his hands were made for engines. By 75, he was lead mechanic, diagnosing rattles that no one else could hear, the scent of burning oil his cologne. He married Evelyn in 78 at a small church off Bessemer Road, her in a borrowed white dress, him in his best suit. They bought the brick house on 6th Avenue with a VA loan, planted collard in the backyard. Tamika came in 80, then a son who didn't make it past infancy, a loss that hollowed Leroy out but taught him to hold tighter to what remained. Years blurred into oil changes and brake jobs. But the triggers were always there, lurking like exhaust fumes. In '85, a white customer accused him of overcharging, called him a thieving N right there in the bay. Old man Hargrove backed Leary up, fired the customer on the spot. But the word stuck, a splinter under the skin. Then came the '90s layoffs at the steel mills, friends losing homes while Leary kept steady. He volunteered at the VFW hall, listening to other black vets swap stories of denied benefits, of being pulled over more times than they could count. Systems rigged, Junibug, one would say over lukewarm beer. We fought for freedom, but it ain't ours. By 2010, the shop changed hands. Old Hargrove retired, sold to a chain. Leary adapted, trained the young bucks, ignored the microaggressions from new managers who assumed he couldn't read blueprints. But the pandemic hit in 2020 like a wrecking ball. Corporate cutbacks, efficiency measures they called it. Leary at 62 was redundant. His last paycheck came with a pat on the back and a thanks for your service, not for Vietnam, but for the shop. He left his tools behind that day, thinking he'd grab them later. But weeks turned to months, calls went unanswered. The new owner, Tyler Hargrove, no relation to the old man, just a coincidence that stung changed the locks. Lying in that hospital bed, Leary's mind replayed the morning of the incident. He'd woken at dawn, the house quiet except for Evelyn's soft snoring. Coffee burned his tongue as he stared at the empty spot in the garage where his toolbox should be. Those snap-on wrenches weren't just metal, they were his proof. Proof he'd built something from nothing. The VA checks barely covered the mortgage now, and with Evelyn's meds eating the rest, he couldn't replace them. One last trip, he'd told himself, slipping the screwdriver into his pocket for habit, not harm. Driving down a 65, the radio played old Motown, but his thoughts were on the boy he'd mentored at the shop, a kid like he once was, now out of work too. What Leary didn't know, what no one in his family suspected, was that Sergeant Caldwell had his own triggers, ones that twisted the narrative darker. Back in 2015, Caldwell's brother, a cop in Montgomery, had been stabbed during a routine stop by a man wielding a box cutter. The attacker was black, high on something, and the story made local news. Caldwell never spoke of it, but it colored every call after. A screwdriver? In his mind, it might as well have been a knife. The department knew, his psych evals noted heightened vigilance, but they kept him on the street. As Leroy drifted into uneasy sleep, a nurse adjusted his IV, her touch gentle. But outside in the hallway, Tamika overheard two officers laughing about, another one biting the dust. Her blood boiled. Was this just a misunderstanding or something systemic rotten to the core? And then came the whisper from a hospital insider. The security footage showed more than the police let on, a hesitation, a racial slur muttered under Caldwell's breath just before the shots. If it surfaced, it could change everything. But would it? The fluorescent lights in the ICU buzzed like angry hornets, casting long shadows across Leroy Thompson's hospital bed. 3 days had passed since the shooting, but the pain in his body was nothing compared to the storm raging inside his mind. Morphine made the edges soft, yet every time he closed his eyes, the same scene played on repeat. The moment Sergeant Caldwell's face twisted, the muzzle flash, the sound of 3 shots ripping through metal and flesh. And right before the first round hit, those words, low and venomous, caught on the workshop's audio feed but buried in the official report. "Stay down, boy." Leary had heard that word his whole life. In the army, whispered behind his back during roll call. At the shop, muttered by customers who didn't like the price he quoted. On the street, spat from car windows during traffic stops he never deserved. But hearing it from a man with a badge and a gun, right before the trigger was pulled, that cut different. It wasn't just a slur. It was permission. Permission to see Leary not as a 62-year-old veteran, not as a father, not as a man who'd rebuilt more engines than most people had years on Earth, but as a threat. As less than human. He shifted under the thin blanket, wincing as the stitches in his thigh pulled tight. The nurse had told him the femoral artery had been nicked. Another half-inch and he'd have bled out on that concrete floor before the ambulance even turned onto 20th Street. Doctors called it lucky. Leary called it cruel. Lucky would have been walking out with his toolbox. Lucky would have been dying in his sleep next to Evelyn after another 40 years, not fighting for breath in a room that smelled like bleach and regret. Across town, in the windowless interview room of the Birmingham Police Department's Internal Affairs Division, Sergeant Ryan Caldwell sat ramrod straight, hands folded on the steel table. The investigator, Lieutenant Denise Harper, a black woman with 23 years on the force and eyes that missed nothing, slid a still image across the table. It showed Leary on his knees, screwdriver dangling from limp fingers, blood already pooling beneath him. "Walk me through it again," she said, voice flat. Caldwell didn't flinch. "Business owner called 911, said armed subject was threatening him. We arrived, suspect refused to drop what was in his hand. He advanced. I gave verbal commands. He didn't comply. I feared for the owner's life and my own. 3 rounds center mass to stop the threat." Harper tapped the photo. Center mass would have been chest and abdomen, you hit shoulder and thigh. Almost like you were aiming low. I was aiming center mass, Caldwell repeated, jaw tight. He moved, adrenaline happens. She leaned forward. Bodycam audio picked up something right before the shots. Stay down, boy, that your voice? Caldwell's eyes flicked to the side just for a second. I don't recall saying that. Harper didn't blink. We both know the audio doesn't lie, and we both know you've got 4 prior complaints. 1 for excessive force, 1 for racial language on a traffic stop in 17, suspension, you remember that one? That was thrown out. Only because the complainant didn't show up to the hearing. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. Caldwell leaned back, arms crossed. You trying to hang this on me because he's black and I'm white? That's the angle. Harper's voice stayed even. I'm trying to find out why a 62-year-old mechanic with no criminal record, no weapon, and 37 years at the same shop ended up with 2 bullets in him over a screwdriver. You tell me. Silence stretched. Caldwell's fingers drummed once on the table, then stopped. He looked like trouble. The way he held that tool, the way he stared, I've seen that look before. Like your brother's attacker? Caldwell's face hardened. Don't bring him into this. Too late, it's already in your file. Psych eval from 2019 flagged hypervigilance related to personal trauma. You never followed up with counseling, department let it slide. Now here we are. Back at the hospital, Tamika sat beside her father's bed holding his hand. The swelling in his face had gone down enough that she could see the man she grew up with, the one who taught her how to change a tire at 10, who cried when she graduated college, who still called her baby girl even though she was pushing 40. His eyes fluttered open. Tamika, I'm here, Daddy, he swallowed, throat dry. They gonna say I threatened that boy, they gonna say I had a weapon. I know what the news is saying, but I saw the footage they released, grainy, edited. They cut the part where you were backing up, not coming forward. Leary's gaze drifted to the ceiling. I just wanted my wrenches, that's all. 37 years of my life sitting in somebody else's drawer. Tamika squeezed his hand tighter. We gon' fight this, lawyers already looking at the full tape. Civil rights group offered to help pro bono. We ain't letting this go quiet. Lyra tried to smile, but it came out crooked. I'm tired, baby girl. Tired of provin' I belong every damn day. She leaned in, voice fierce. You don't have to prove nothing no more, they the ones who gotta answer now. What neither of them knew yet, what the department was desperately trying to keep sealed, was that the full, unedited security footage from the shop showed something else entirely. Right after Caldwell fired the 3rd shot, he muttered under his breath again, words the audio captured crystal clear. Shoulda stayed home, old man. And in the corner of the frame, barely visible, Tyler Hargrove, the young owner who made the call, stood frozen, phone still in hand, face pale. He hadn't moved to help, hadn't said a word, just watched. The question wasn't whether the shooting was justified. The question was how many warnings the system had ignored before a good man bled out on a workshop floor. Have you ever watched someone you love get treated like they don't matter by people who were supposed to protect them? Type "seen it" in the comments if this hits close to home. I'm reading every word. The hospital room grew quieter as night settled over Birmingham. The only sounds the rhythmic hiss of Leroy's oxygen and the distant murmur of nurses in the hallway. Tamika had stepped out to grab coffee from the cafeteria, leaving her father alone with his thoughts for the first time since the shooting. He stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the little black dots in the acoustic panels the way he used to count rivets on an engine block. 1, 2, 3, each number pulled him deeper into the memory he'd tried hardest to lock away. It was 1987. Leary was 38, already a foreman at the shop. A Friday afternoon, sun blazing through the open bay doors. A silver Cadillac pulled in, white lady behind the wheel, mid-40s, pearls tight around her neck. She complained the AC wasn't cold enough after a $400 compressor job Leary had just finished. He explained it needed time to cycle, offered to check the Freon levels again for free. She stepped out, heels clicking on the concrete, and said loud enough for every mechanic in the bay to hear, I'm not paying good money to have some colored boy tell me what my car needs. The bay went still, tools stopped clanging. Old man Hargrove appeared from the office, face red. Before he could speak, Leroy lifted his hand, calm, steady, and said, Ma'am, I've been fixin' cars longer than your boy been driven. If you don't trust my work, take it somewhere else. No charge for today. She stormed off, tires squealing. That night, 2 squad cars rolled up to Leroy's house on 6th Avenue. Officers, both white, said they'd received a complaint of threatening behavior at the shop. They asked to search the garage. Leroy stood on his porch in slippers, arms crossed, Evelyn behind the screen door clutching Tamika's hand. Y'all got a warrant? He asked. They didn't. They left after 20 minutes of staring him down, but the message was clear. Step out of line, and the system remembers. That was the first time Leroy realized the badge could be a weapon too. Not the gun, though that came later, but the paperwork, the reports, the routine stops that turned into hours wasted at the precinct. Over the next decade, he was pulled over 11 times for nothing more than driving while black in certain neighborhoods. Each time the same script, license and registration, hands visible, step out slowly. Once in '94, an officer named Caldwell, younger than, fresh out of the academy, cuffed him during a supposed matching description call. Leary spent 4 hours in holding before they admitted the suspect was 5'6" and bald. Caldwell smirked as he uncuffed him. Better safe than sorry, right? Leary never filed a complaint. What was the point? Paperwork disappeared. Witnesses forgot. The department closed ranks. He went home, kissed Evelyn, told Tamika everything was fine, and went back to work the next morning like nothing happened. But something had. A small piece of trust cracked and never fully mended. Now, 34 years later, that same man, older, slower, wounded, lay in a hospital bed because the same face from 1994 had pulled the trigger. Caldwell hadn't changed, the system hadn't changed. Only Leary had. He'd gotten tired. Tired of proving he wasn't a threat, tired of lowering his eyes, tired of swallowing the word boy like it didn't burn. The door opened. Tamika returned with 2 styrofoam cups, steam curling up. She saw the look on her father's face and set the coffee down fast. "Daddy, what's wrong?" He turned his head slowly. "I remembered something, that Officer Caldwell. He was the same one who cuffed me back in '94. Same smirk, same eyes." Tamika's breath caught. "You sure? Man, don't forget a face that looked at him like he was already guilty." She pulled out her phone, fingers trembling as she opened notes. "I'm telling the lawyer first thing tomorrow. This ain't just a bad call anymore. This is a pattern." Leary reached for her hand. "Don't get your hopes up too high, baby girl. I seen how this plays out." "Maybe," she said, voice low and fierce. "But I ain't the same little girl who watched from the porch anymore, and you ain't the same man who let it slide." Across the city, in a dimly lit basement apartment on the south side, Officer Marcus Donnelly, Caldwell's partner that day, sat on a sagging couch staring at his phone. The department had issued a gag order, no talking to press, no social media, no discussing the case. But Donnelly couldn't stop replaying the bodycam clip they'd all been forced to watch and debrief. 3 shots, Leary dropping. And Caldwell's voice unmistakable. "Stay down, boy." Donnelly had wanted to say something right then, wanted to ask why the 3rd shot was necessary when the man was already on his knees. But he stayed quiet. Loyalty. Fear of being labeled a snitch. Fear of losing the only job that paid the bills. Now the silence felt heavier than the gun on his hip ever had. He opened a blank text to an old academy buddy who'd left the force years ago. Typed 3 words, deleted them. Typed again, "You ever feel like we're on the wrong side?" He hit send before he could stop himself. Back at the hospital, the night nurse came in to check vitals. As she adjusted the IV, she leaned close to Leary and whispered, "I heard the full tapes with the DA now. Unedited. People talking about it in the break room." "Hang in there, Mr. Thompson." Leary looked up at her young black eyes, tired but kind. "They gonna do right?" She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. "Sometimes they do. When enough eyes are watching." But the real question wasn't whether the tape would surface. It was whether the truth, even when caught on camera, would be enough to pierce the armor the system had built around men like Caldwell. Have you ever stayed silent when you knew something was wrong because speaking up felt too dangerous? Type "silent too long" in the comments if that's you. Let's talk about it. I'm right here with you. The days blurred into a gray haze inside UAB's trauma wing. Leroy Thompson's body was mending, stitches holding, infection beaten back, but the real damage festered elsewhere. Every time a nurse came in to change the dressing on his thigh, he flinched not from pain, but from the memory of boots stepping over his blood on the workshop floor. He kept replaying Caldwell's face. The same hard jaw from 1994, the same cold certainty that a black man holding a tool was automatically dangerous. 30 years apart, same script. Tamika had turned their small hospital room into a war room. Legal pads covered the rolling tray table. Names, dates, phone numbers scribbled in her neat handwriting. The civil rights attorney, Reginald Reggie Hayes, a tall, silver-haired man who'd won 3 7-figure settlements against the city, sat across from her now, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. He'd reviewed the unedited security footage the night before. "Mr. Thompson," Reggie began, voice low and measured, "the tape is devastating for them. You enter calmly. You state your purpose once, you back up when they draw. You drop to one knee before the first shot, and Caldwell's audio, it's unmistakable. Stay down, boy." Then after the 3rd round, "Shoulda stayed home, old man." That's not split-second decision-making. That's intent. Leroy stared at the IV line in his arm. "Intent to what? To make sure you didn't walk out of there upright." Tamika's eyes filled, but her voice stayed steel. "So we sue," Reggie nodded. "We file a Section 1983 civil rights claim against Caldwell individually and the department for failure to train and supervise. We also name Tyler Hargrove and the corporate owner for false reporting and premises liability. But the real fight is criminal. The DA's office has the full packet now, grand juries being convened next month." Leary let out a dry laugh that turned into a cough. "Grand jury in Jefferson County. Half of them probably golf with the chief. Maybe, Reggie said, but this isn't 1994, cameras don't lie anymore, and people are tired. The tape leaked to one local activist group last week, anonymous source inside the department. They haven't posted it publicly yet, but word's spreading in the right circles, pressure's building. Tamika looked at her father. Daddy, you want this to go public or keep it quiet? Leroy closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, they were clear. I spent my whole life keeping quiet so I could keep my job, keep my house, keep my family safe. Look where that got me. 2 holes in my body and a police report calling me the aggressor. Now let it breathe. Reggie stood, buttoning his cuff. Then we move fast. I need your signature on the complaint today. And Mr. Thompson, when you're ready, I'd like you to speak, not to the press yet, to the grand jury. Your voice, your words, that's what cuts deepest. Lyra gave a single nod. I'll talk, but only if they look me in the eye when I do. That evening, Officer Marcus Donnelly sat alone in his cruiser outside a quiet gas station on University Boulevard. Engine off, windows cracked, the radio low. He hadn't slept right since the shooting. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Leroy's slow drop to his knees, heard the wet thud of body hitting concrete. Heard Caldwell's voice calm, almost bored, saying boy like it was punctuation. Donnelly pulled out his phone. Opened the Internal Affairs tip line app, the anonymous one they all pretended didn't exist. He stared at the blank report form for 10 minutes. Then he started typing. On 8/17/2021, during the Thompson incident at Hargrove Auto, I observed SGT. Caldwell used unnecessary deadly force. Suspect was retreating, non-combative, verbally compliant until commands escalated. Third shot fired after subject was already down on one knee. Post-incident, I heard Caldwell make racially charged statements not included in initial report. I did not intervene at the scene. I regret that now. He read it twice. Thumb hovered over submit, then he pressed it. The confirmation screen flashed. Report received. Anonymous ID number 47,219. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. Meanwhile, in a tidy office park 10 miles away, Tyler Hargrove sat behind a glass desk, staring at the same grainy still the police had shown him. Leroy on his knees, blood spreading. Hargrove's lawyer, a slick corporate type in a $1,000 suit, leaned against the window. You stick to the script, the lawyer said. You felt threatened, you saw a weapon, you called 911. End of story. Tyler rubbed his eyes. He didn't raise it, he just held it like it was part of his hand. That doesn't matter, the law says reasonable fear, you were reasonable. Tyler looked up. Was I? The lawyer didn't answer. Just checked his watch. Depositions in 3 weeks, practice the statement, and for God's sake don't talk to anyone. But Tyler already had. The night before, he'd driven to the hospital parking lot at 2 a.m., sat in his truck, watched the lights in the trauma wing. He didn't go inside, didn't know what he'd say if he did. But he stayed until dawn, engine idling, guilt burning hotter than shame. Back in the hospital, Leroy was sitting up for the first time without help. Evelyn had come in earlier, brought collard greens in a Tupperware, the smell filling the room like home. She'd held his hand and cried without words. Now the room was quiet again. Tamika sat on the edge of the bed. Lawyer says the grand jury might indict, says the tape changes everything. Leroy looked out the window at the Birmingham skyline, smokestacks, church steeples, the red glow of Vulcan in the distance. Maybe. But even if they charge him, even if they convict, it don't bring back 37 years. Don't bring back the nights I laid awake wondering if I was enough. Tamika leaned her head on his good shoulder. You were always enough, Daddy. They the ones who never saw it. And in that moment, with the city lights flickering below, a quiet truth settled between them. Justice might come, slow and partial, but the wound it was trying to heal had been open for decades. What happens when the system finally has to look at its own hands, and they're covered in blood it swore wasn't there? Drop, finally, in the comments if you think the truth is about to break wide open. I'm watching every word you write. The grand jury room in the Jefferson County Courthouse smelled of old wood polish and stale coffee, the kind that sat in a pot all morning until it turned bitter. It was early 2023 now, 18 months after the shooting that left Leroy Thompson with a limp and nightmares that woke him sweating in the dead of night. He sat at the witness table, back straight despite the ache in his shoulder that flared up on rainy days. His suit, dark blue, pressed by Evelyn the night before, felt too tight around the collar, but he wouldn't fidget. Not here. Not in front of these 12 strangers, who held the power to decide if Sergeant Ryan Caldwell's badge meant he could shoot a man over a screwdriver and walk away clean. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Alicia Brooks with a stack of files thick as a phone book, leaned forward. Mr. Thompson, in your own words, describe what happened when the officers entered the shop. Leroy cleared his throat, voice steady like he was explaining a carburetor rebuild. I walked in through the side door. Tyler Hargrove, the new owner, was behind the counter. I said, I'm here for my tools, the ones I left when they let me go. He got nervous, backed up, grabbed his phone, didn't say much. Next thing, sirens, 2 officers come bustin' in, guns out. Caldwell yells, "Drop it, hands up." I had the screwdriver in my hand, habit from working cars all my life. I started to set it down, but he didn't wait. 3 shots. First hit my shoulder, spun me. Second grazed my thigh. Third went clean through when I was already dropping. The room went quiet except for the scratch of a juror's pen. Brooks played the unedited security footage on a laptop projector. The grainy image filled the wall, Leroy backing up, hands rising slow. Caldwell's face tight, fingers squeezing. The audio crackled, "Stay down, boy." Then the shots, Leroy's groan, the third round firing as he hit his knees. Gasps rippled through the jury. One older black woman covered her mouth. "And did you hear anything after the shots?" Brooks asked. Leroy nodded slow. "Yeah," Caldwell muttered. "Shoulda stayed home, old man, like I was the fool for coming back for what was mine." Brooks turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this wasn't a split-second call. This was a man with a history, 4 complaints, including racial bias, who saw a 62-year-old veteran as a threat because of the color of his skin and the tool in his hand. The evidence shows intent, not accident." Caldwell testified 2 days later, face pale under the fluorescent lights. His lawyer coached him well: "Stick to protocol, emphasize fear." "I believed my life was in danger." The suspect held a pointed object aggressively. "I followed training." But the cross-examination cracked him. Brooks held up Caldwell's psych eval from 2019. "You were flagged for hypervigilance after your brother's stabbing. You skipped mandated counseling. And in 1994 you detained Mr. Thompson without cause." "Same man. Coincidence?" Caldwell's jaw clenched. "I don't recall that incident specifically." "Really? Because Mr. Thompson does." "Vividly? And your partner that day, Officer Donnelly, submitted an anonymous report stating you used excessive force and made racial comments post-shooting. Does that jog your memory?" Caldwell glanced at his lawyer, sweat beading on his forehead. "No comment." The revelations kept coming, each one a hammer blow. Donnelly broke anonymity a week later, testifying under oath. "I saw it all. Leroy wasn't advancing, he was complying. The third shot wasn't necessary." And the words, they weren't protocol, they were personal. Tyler Hargrove took the stand last, hands trembling as he gripped the rail. "I called 911 because I panicked. He didn't threaten me, just asked for his tools. I said weapon because I don't know, he was big, older, black. I assumed the worst. I regret it every day." The jury deliberated for 5 hours. When they filed back in, the foreperson, a retired teacher with gray curls, stood. "On the charge of aggravated assault, we recommend indictment." Leroy sat frozen as the words sank in. Evelyn squeezed his hand so tight her knuckles went white. Tamika let out a breath she'd held for months. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time the system had blinked. Cracks showed. A man who'd hidden behind a badge was now exposed, his past dragging him into the light. But the emotions ran deeper than relief. Leroy felt a hollow anger swell, anger at the years lost. At the pain Evelyn carried watching him hobble around the house. At the VA appointments that now included therapy for PTSD he'd ignored since Vietnam. Ganger at a city that let Caldwell patrol for decades despite the warnings. And beneath it, a fragile hope. Maybe this time the revelations would stick. Maybe one man's story could chip away at the wall that protected the wrong people. Yet as they left the courthouse, rain slicking the steps, Leroy wondered aloud to Tamika, "Indictment's one thing, conviction, that's where the real fight starts." She nodded, arm linked in his. "We ready, Daddy?" "We been ready." The truth had clawed its way out, raw and undeniable. But in a system built on layers of denial, how far would it go before someone buried it again? Let me know in the comments, what do you think happens next in a case like this? Type your prediction below, I'm reading them all. The courtroom in Jefferson County felt smaller than it should have on the morning of the trial, late fall 2023, leaves turning gold outside the tall windows, but inside the air was thick with tension and the faint smell of floor wax. Leroy Thompson walked in under his own power now, though the cane in his right hand tapped a slow, deliberate rhythm against the marble. His shoulder still ached when the weather turned, a souvenir from the first bullet, but he refused the wheelchair the bailiff offered. "I stood on my feet for 37 years fixin' cars," he told Tamika quietly. "I can stand here too." Sergeant Ryan Caldwell sat at the defense table in a plain gray suit that looked borrowed, his mustache trimmed shorter than usual, eyes fixed on the table like he could will the floor to open. His lawyer, a high-dollar firm the police union hired, had spent months building a wall of technicalities. Qualified immunity, split-second decisions, reasonable officer standard. But the unedited footage played like a ghost in the room. Every juror had watched it twice during voir dire, 3 shots. "Stay down, boy." The third round after Leroy was already falling. The prosecution opened with Officer Marcus Donnelly on the stand. He looked smaller in civilian clothes, no badge, no gun. His voice cracked only once. "I've been a cop 12 years. Never fired my weapon on duty until that day. When we rolled up, I saw an older man, hands visible, backing away slow. Sarge yelled commands. Leroy started to comply, dropped to one knee. That's when the first shot went, then the second. I yelled cease fire, but the third came anyway, after, when the threat was gone. The defense tried to paint him as disgruntled, a partner who turned on his own. Donnelly didn't flinch. I turned because I couldn't sleep anymore. Because I kept seeing that man's face, 62 years old, bleeding on concrete over tools he earned. Because Sarge said boy like it was 1950, not 2021. Tyler Hargrove testified next, pale and sweating under the lights. He admitted the 911 call word for word, armed individual threatening me with a weapon. Then he broke. I lied, not on purpose at first, I panicked. Saw a big black man in my shop after hours after layoffs and my brain filled in the rest. I said weapon because a screwdriver looked like one in my head. I stood there watching him bleed and didn't say a word to stop it. I should have. Every day since I wish I had. The jury shifted. One man in the back row, a retired mechanic himself, wiped his eyes. Leroy took the stand last. No notes, no theatrics, just a man in a suit telling his truth. I didn't go there to rob nobody, didn't go to fight. I went for my Snap-on set, wrenches I bought with money I earned turning nuts since Nixon was president. I told Mr. Hargrove why I was there. Polite, calm. When the officers came, I raised my hands. I said, it's just a screwdriver. I started to set it down. That's when he shot. First one knocked me sideways. Second burned my leg like fire. Third, I was already on my knees. Heard him say I should have stayed home. Like my home ain't right here in Birmingham, same as his. He paused, looked straight at Caldwell across the room. I served in Vietnam, came back with scars nobody could see. Worked every day since to build something, family, house, respect. And in 1 second, a man with a badge took all that and called me boy while he did it. I ain't asking for pity. I'm asking y'all to see what really happened. Not what the report said, what the tape shows. The courtroom stayed silent long after he stepped down. Even the bailiff forgot to call the next witness for a beat. Closing arguments came fast. Prosecution. Pattern of bias, excessive force, racial animus. Defense, fear, training, tragedy, but not crime. The jury went out at 2:17 p.m. They returned at 4:42. Guilty. Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Use of excessive force under color of law. The courtroom exhaled like it had been holding its breath for 2 years. Caldwell's head dropped. His lawyer whispered furiously. Leroy sat stone still, Evelyn's hand crushing his. Tamika cried without sound. Sentencing came 3 months later, early 2024. 10 years, eligible for parole after 6. The judge, a white woman with 30 years on the bench, spoke directly to Caldwell before gaveling. You wore the uniform you swore to protect. Instead, you let old wounds and old words guide your hand. This city deserved better. This man deserved better. Leroy didn't smile when the sentence landed. He just nodded once slow, like a man finally exhaling after holding it too long. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, but the family slipped out a side door. In the car driving back to 6th Avenue, Leroy looked at the passing streets, places he'd fixed cars, raised kids, buried friends. Think it changes anything? He asked Tamika. She glanced at him in the rearview. Maybe not the whole system, but it changed one piece of it today, and that piece had your name on it. The case closed in spring 2024. Caldwell began serving time at a state facility up north. The department settled the civil suit quietly, mid-six figures for Leroy and the family. Enough to pay off the house, cover Evelyn's meds, replace every tool he'd lost, and then some. But money never filled the hole where dignity used to live. Leroy still walked with a cane on bad days, still woke up hearing shots. But he started mentoring young mechanics again at a community center garage, free classes for kids who looked like he once did. He taught them diagnostics, but mostly he taught them to stand tall, speak clear, never lower their eyes first. One afternoon, a teenage boy asked him, "Mr. Thompson, you ever get scared they gone do it again?" Leroy wiped grease from his hands. "Every day, son, but scared don't mean silent, and silent don't mean safe." The city moved on, most days forgot. But in certain neighborhoods, in certain garages, in certain living rooms, the name Junebug Thompson became something else. Proof that sometimes, after everything, a good man could still make the system blink. And in the quiet moments when the house was still and Evelyn slept beside him, Leroy would whisper to the dark, 37 years. And I finally got my tools back. What does real justice look like to you? Not the courtroom kind, but the kind that lets a man sleep at night. Type "justice served" in the comments if this ending hit you where it counts. Or tell me what you would have done in Leroy's place. I'm here for every story you share. And if you made it this far, thank you for riding with me through the whole thing. Hit subscribe if you want more stories that don't pull punches. We got more comings.